Hi everybody. As promised, I want to go over a few of the notes from the first set of reading responses. We'll talk about this in class next week on Monday, but if you're going to revise over the weekend, I thought it might be helpful to get a sense for some of the general comments that I have, the general suggestions for changing, making improvements, these sorts of things. In general, like I said in class, I thought these were really good starts. The most important thing is that you all really seem to understand the two articles or the three articles, whichever ones you used. The trick we need to do now is to get that understanding translated to the page. We're still kind of having trouble with that reader who doesn't know what we know, right? Who doesn't understand the text the way that we do. So what I want to look at specifically are some examples of coming to terms, strong examples, and then some that show places where we could improve. I want to look at examples of forwarding, and then talk about sort of textual working with resources and making moves within a paper. Because this is really all about making sure that all the things that you know up here can translate to the page. Okay, that's really fundamentally the goal of this class. So let's just go through these. I'm going to try not to go on too long, and I can make these samples available if anybody wants to look at them as well. So just let me know if you want that. So the first section here is coming to terms. The thing to do here is to remember that coming to terms is a meshing or a representation of the global perspective and the local, right? So you have a global in the sense that you are offering a general statement or series of statements about what an author is trying to do, and then you are keying in on specifics, the local, key terms, concepts, the kinds of things that you want to talk about. What I saw in a lot of the papers was that you would give the big picture and then no detail, right? And so what would happen then is when you start talking about details from an article later, maybe Jacob's sidewalks or hubs, pulse takers, that sort of thing, we have no real sense of a way to connect the big picture to those specific things, and that needs to happen in coming to terms, right? So let's look at these two examples really fast and see if we can get a sense for where this is happening. So in the first one, how does a person know what is the right design for space? We all have different ideas, so how do we know? Well, in Jacob's groundbreaking book, 1961 book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, Jacobs does exactly that. Although Jacobs attacks the orthodox city planning that occurs when rebuilding a space, she proposes a solution. So up to now, we're doing pretty well, right? We've got a general sense for what she's doing. And here it goes. Now, before Jacobs is able to begin her solution, she has to first address the city planners. So this is a connection to orthodox city planning, but we're not getting any closer to orthodox. Jacob's primary problem she expresses about them is that their ideas are inadequate to the human needs, not specific. Humans do not need a space to be physically appealing in order to function properly and communicate. Again, not really getting any closer to what that means, that orthodox city planning. Even though her appearance is more pleasing to the eyes, even though appearance is more pleasing to the eyes, it should not be the primary function of a space, which is exactly what the planners base their design around. So at this point, we have a sense that she's identifying a problem, but it's not very specific, and it only seems to be aesthetic, right? Which is not really what Jacobs was after. She talked about aesthetics, but it wasn't the primary goal. As a result, city planners continually fail to design a successful space. What would that mean to have a successful space? Jacobs actually tells us, right? So that's something that would need to be in here, something specific. Once Jacobs moves into illustrating her solution of what she believes to be the perfect layout for a space, we start to see that the focus of her space is about socialization. In fact, we see she wants a small city space with small structures centralized around one thing, the sidewalk. So here we're getting some detail, we're getting some specifics, but we don't have a sense for what they're responding to. So the big picture problem that Jacobs was addressing is not articulated very clearly. So we have her responding to something that the reader doesn't know about. Now the other thing here is that one of the things this author is doing is sort of pointing towards the sidewalk, right? Now our purpose for this time is that the sidewalk is where everybody can interact with everybody because each person uses the sidewalk at some time. So the sidewalk is clearly important, but they're not explaining how Jacobs described the sidewalk. We have no quote, we have no definition, we have no really specific explanation for why this idea was important for Jacobs, which would then allow this author to say, okay, now here's how I want to use that notion of the sidewalk. So what we need here is an explanation of how the sidewalk is important, right? and then they can make that move to use the idea of the sidewalk on their own. So let's look at the next one. This is an example where I think they do a little bit better job of defining concepts, grounding the general global project of Jacobs in specific details. So this one says, rushing here and there, to and fro, sidewalks can be seen as an area of constant activity and social interaction. Jane Jacobs recognized this element in her book, 1961 book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, with her example of sidewalks and how they function within cities. She found that different aspects of city life, such as the sidewalk, create a buzz or noise, allowing interactions to form that would otherwise be non-existent. Here we need the introduction of this quote, of course, but otherwise the quote is good. They, sidewalks, bring together people who do not know each other, allowing, as Jacobs later points out, for the formation of trust within a city. The trust of a city street is formed over time from many, many little public sidewalk contexts. So you can already see global to specific. This person gives us a really quick introduction to Jacobs, the big picture, specifically focused on sidewalks. So we know what they're going to talk about. We know what sidewalks mean. We know how Jacobs talks about sidewalks. And then from there, this person can start doing their own work with that concept. I hope that makes sense. So in example one, we have an interesting sort of general view, but lacks specifics. In this one, this person's getting very targeted, right? This person already knows what they want to talk about. And leaving this paragraph, we have a really clear sense for the details that they're going to deal with. So the second example is a very strong example of a targeted coming to terms, making sure that those specific features are prominent. Okay, so let's look at the next example here, and this one is forwarding. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure that what they say is clear at all times. One of the things we do as academic writers is we write to audiences that we don't know, right? Readers that we don't know. And so we're not there to explain our ideas to them. In this case, we need to have a sense for how we can present information from our sources in a way that our reader will understand and follow without us being there to sort of translate. And we do that with language. We do that using words, transitions, introductions. We keep our reader on the page at all times. So one thing I note in the bold here, and this sounds threatening, but it's a common mistake. If you don't attribute information in the text, either through citation, obviously, but also through just sort of good transitions, effectively you're plagiarizing, which is obviously not a good thing. So let's read through this really quick, and I've put in bold some of the moments where we come into problems. So neighborhoods, communities, schools, and businesses are all built in similar ways. They are built in a manner to benefit the people that utilize them, specifically focusing on things to help people economically, socially, and culturally. In Malcolm Gladwell's Designs for Work, he talks about ways to properly build a business, whether it be the design of the building, design or the building, or the people that use it. So we're pretty good so far. Here we go. Hubs, gatekeepers, and pulse takers are different types of people found in a workplace. What's missing? Gladwell. We have no idea as a reader who's never read Gladwell that this is from Gladwell. We have quotation marks around it, but they're not attached to anybody. So at this point, we have no idea whether hubs, gatekeepers, and pulse takers are Gladwell's idea or this author's idea, right? So hubs, gatekeepers, and pulse takers are different types of people found in a workplace, but I believe they can also be found in a school. We have more confusion because now they're saying, I believe, and so is this Gladwell's idea about work? Is it this person's idea about school? We don't really know what's going on. Hubs are the people who know almost everybody and have a lot of connections, usually more than others. Here we go, Gladwell again. Gladwell believes these people should be placed in the center, in which most cases they are. At this point, we're back to Gladwell, so we know he comments on hubs, but we don't know in what context. Is he talking about schools? Is he talking about work? It says placed in the center. Center of what? That could be anything, right? So this is a really good example of a person who's saying interesting things and has sort of the right ideas, but they're not giving us those clues within their sentences to help us link all the ideas together. So what they need to be doing is really working in conversation with Gladwell. Gladwell describes 3 terms: hubs, gatekeepers, and pulse takers, which are different types of people found in the workplace. He describes them in the workplace, but I think they can also be found in school. Hubs, according to Gladwell, are people who know almost everybody and have a lot of connections, usually more than others. Gladwell believes these people should be placed in the center of the work environment, in which most cases they are. So you're adding just phrases and words, transitional phrases, clarifying words, and suddenly everything becomes much clearer, right? It becomes crystal clear what it is we're trying to say here. And the difference between what they say and what I say is super evident. I hope that makes sense. Obviously tell me if it doesn't, if it's not. Okay, here I wanted to talk really quickly about pivoting, moving away from what they say to what I say. Several of you did a really good job. Several of you are starting to get the idea of it, and it still needs a little bit of work. So I wanted to show you two really quick examples just to give you a sense for the level of clarity and depth that might be useful in making sure that this whole pivot, move away from theirs to yours, is super evident, right? We don't want our reader to miss it. If the reader misses it, our argument is lost. So it's really important that this is done well. So in example one, in the first, we'll just talk about the pivot, nothing else here. In the first one, they introduce Jacobs, they talk about her book, they give us kind of a big picture overview, and then they transition into Glaser and Glaser's response to Jacobs. You'll see there that they don't really explain Glaser at all, right? They just say that he disagreed with her and that he said her ideas are old school. And then we get this bold sentence, which I put it in bold, not the author. It says, Jacobs pushed the idea of regulating a single perfect density that Glaser pushed strongly against because cities should cater to a wide range of people. We have a sense for what Jacobs was talking about. We have no sense for what Glaser was talking about. The next sentence, while both perspectives counter each other, they are both right, and it is possible for both to coexist in one city. So the rest of this paper is talking about that city, that example that brings both of these ideas together. But what they haven't done is shown us any sort of sense for how both can be right, both can be wrong, both can counter each other, and how they can coexist, right? They just haven't really framed what it is they're going to try and do. They've got a really cool example, actually. I promise you it's really cool. But they don't give us a very clear sense for how they're going to get there, right? So at this point, we need to understand how these things counter each other, which means we need more coming to terms. We need to know that they're both right, how, what's good about them, what's bad about them, what's this person going to pull out and use, right? We're back to that targeted coming to terms. What are the concepts within each of these essays that they want to pull out and say, these two things coexist in the city that I want to talk about. Okay, in the next example, this person does a much more thorough job. So in the first paragraph, we have Gladwell, an introduction to Gladwell. And actually, there was a Jacobs paragraph before this one. I didn't include it. So basically, you're looking at paragraphs 2 and 3. So they introduce Jacobs, they introduce Gladwell here. And then we get this third paragraph. But why haven't these concepts which function so successfully in the workplace been applied to institutions of higher learning? In many college campuses across the U.S., students are separated by their area of study, their extracurricular activities, or their associations. At Cal Poly, where students must declare their major when they apply, dorms are often characterized by a person's major. At almost all universities, buildings and classrooms are sorted and categorized by subjects. This system has scarcely been questioned because it is efficient. Sounds like Jacobs, right? The long-standing view has been that there should be a math building, an art building, a humanities building, so that similar classroom supplies, professors, and students can be in close proximity to each other. While this allows students who are studying the same subject to learn together, it limits the interactions between students across disciplines. So what we have is a coming to terms with Jacobs, a coming to terms with Gladwell, and then this question, well, if it works so well there, why hasn't it been applied to this other context? And then we get an explanation of how they intend to do it, right? So we have a very clear move away from what they say to what I say, but it's always related, it's always connected. Pulling the ideas that we've developed in our coming to terms, this notion of proximity, this notion of communication, innovation, interaction. We're pulling that out of our coming to terms, and we're using it to set ourselves off on a new course. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there, and we will go over some other things in class, but I hope you can get a chance to watch this over the weekend and maybe think about where your coming to terms is successful or not. In most of your papers, I noted whether I thought you were doing a good job or whether you needed some work. So this little tutorial coupled with comments should at least give you a place to start. And of course, I'm available to talk at any point you want to chat about your paper. So Feel free to email and schedule something. Otherwise, hope you have a good weekend.